What if the person you love is one step away from leaving you and you don't even know it? You go about your days feeling safe, unaware that beneath the surface, things are shifting. They're not leaving in a burst of anger or dramatic goodbye. No, it's something quieter, something slower, a gentle unraveling that's easy to miss. Until suddenly, they're gone, and you're left wondering how it all slipped away. There's no shouting, no ultimatums, just a subtle drawing of boundaries, a quiet distance they put between you, inch by inch. Each of these invisible signs, these silent markers, represent steps toward an exit they may never tell you about. By the time you notice, it's often too late. This isn't about the usual signs you might expect. It's about the unnoticed shifts, the silent choices, the hidden signs that all say the same thing: they're preparing to leave. And once you recognize these signs, the weight of each one will hit like a ton of bricks. So, here are the 5 quiet signs someone is about to walk away. Listen carefully, because the last one might be the step that takes them out of your life for good. Boundary 1. Emotional withdrawal. There was a time when they shared everything with you: dreams, fears, even the random thoughts that crossed their mind. They used to light up when telling you about their day, every detail pouring out with a mix of excitement and trust. Now there's a silence that fills those once vibrant spaces. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but slowly they start holding back, keeping their thoughts and emotions to themselves. When you ask how they're feeling, their responses grow shorter, less detailed. They say they're fine, but you sense an emptiness in their words. It's easy to dismiss this as just a phase. Everyone has off days after all. But there's a difference between a passing mood and an emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal is like a wall going up, a barrier where once there was openness. They're no longer expressing their feelings, not because they're angry or trying to make a point, but because they're protecting themselves. It's a quiet, almost invisible change, a self-preservation instinct that speaks volumes. This withdrawal isn't about punishing you or starting a fight. In fact, it's often the opposite. They're not looking to create drama or stir up conflict. Instead, they're retreating inward, choosing silence as a way to avoid further disappointment. Maybe they feel unheard, as though their emotions don't truly matter anymore. Or perhaps they've tried so many times to open up, only to feel that their vulnerability was met with indifference. So, they decide to close off, letting their guard come back up. The Stoics, ancient philosophers who valued inner peace and resilience, understood the need for such boundaries. They believed in the importance of protecting one's peace above all else. For them, this kind of emotional withdrawal wasn't a sign of weakness or avoidance. It was a form of strength, a choice to maintain inner calm over external chaos. When someone starts pulling back emotionally, they're often trying to create that same inner calm. They're looking for stability in a situation that feels increasingly unstable. Imagine them as a fortress, choosing to lock the doors and keep their peace inside. It's not about shutting you out completely, it's about safeguarding their well-being. Each unspoken word, each withheld thought, is a step further into that fortress, a signal that they're choosing solitude over vulnerability. They may still be present physically, but emotionally, they're retreating to a place where they feel safe, even if it means distancing themselves from you. This withdrawal can leave you feeling helpless, unsure of what's gone wrong. You might try harder to reach out, to break down that wall, but without realizing it, they've already chosen to guard their heart. To them, it's better to be alone with their thoughts than to risk feeling let down again. And so they withdraw, seeking a quiet, untroubled place within themselves, leaving you wondering what happened to the closeness you once shared. In the silence of that emotional distance, there's a finality. It's a quiet but powerful message. They're no longer willing to give pieces of themselves without knowing that those pieces will be cherished. This isn't just a shift in mood, it's a boundary they're setting, one that may be hard to undo once it's in place. And with each step further back, they're moving closer to the edge, to the moment where this distance becomes a permanent part of their reality. Boundary 2. Loss of patience. Imagine a moment when the person who once laughed off your mistakes or brushed aside small slights now seems on edge, their patience worn thin. Where they used to forgive forgotten plans, missed calls, or words spoken without thinking, now there's a quiet tension. The look in their eyes has shifted, once warm and understanding, now tinged with a silent frustration. The things they once let slide, the small disappointments, the occasional broken promises, now seem to linger, no longer softened by the benefit of the doubt. Patience doesn't vanish all at once. It erodes slowly, chipping away with every moment they feel unheard, every time they've extended understanding without receiving it in return. It's a boundary that quietly forms, like a slow tide that eventually washes away the foundation beneath it. Losing patience isn't about a sudden burst of anger or irritation. It's the culmination of feeling repeatedly let down, a gradual shift where forgiveness turns into quiet resignation. This change can feel jarring, especially when it happens with someone who was once so understanding. You might catch glimpses of it in their tone, in the way they don't brush things off like they used to. They've grown tired of explaining, of reminding, of hoping things will be different. And so they start to withdraw even more, saving their energy for themselves rather than pouring it into a relationship that feels like an endless cycle of expectation and disappointment. The Stoics taught that our time and energy are finite. They believed in treating these resources with respect, directing them toward things that bring value and peace. When someone's patience fades, it's often because they're realizing that their energy is better spent elsewhere, on their own well-being, on pursuits that bring them fulfillment, on relationships that don't drain them. This boundary isn't about resentment or bitterness. It's about choosing self-worth over the strain of trying to make things work at any cost. The shift from patience to impatience is a signal, a quiet way of reclaiming their own peace. They're no longer willing to bear the weight of misunderstandings or unfulfilled promises. It's a form of self-respect, a line they draw to protect themselves from the exhaustion of giving more than they receive. They've come to value their own time and emotions, recognizing that continuing to forgive endlessly only leads to more frustration, more weariness. In their eyes, each moment of lost patience is another step back, a sign that they're letting go of the idea that things will improve. It's not about anger, it's about choosing peace over compromise, self-worth over endless understanding. And as their patience slips away, so too does the foundation of the relationship, leaving only the echo of what once was. Boundary 3. Prioritizing independence. There was a time when they were fully involved in every aspect of the relationship, sharing moments, making plans together, and weaving their life tightly with yours. Now, though, there's a shift, a subtle yet undeniable distance that shows up in quiet, everyday ways. They're taking up new hobbies, spending more time alone, setting personal goals that don't involve you. It's not dramatic. In fact, it can be so quiet that you might not notice it at first. But gradually, you start to see them invest more in themselves, pouring their energy into interests and pursuits that exist outside of what you share. This isn't done out of resentment or spite. They're not trying to make a statement or provoke a reaction. It's a return to their own sense of self, a way of regaining an identity that may have felt overshadowed or lost. They're seeking strength outside the relationship, not to prove a point, but to prepare themselves, to stand on their own again. It's as if they're quietly building a world that doesn't rely on you, finding their own happiness and independence for reasons they might not even voice. To the Stoics, independence and self-reliance were essential. They believed in cultivating inner strength and resilience, in building a life that wasn't dependent on others for peace and contentment. When someone you love starts prioritizing their independence, it's often for the same reason. They're preparing for a life without the relationship, a future where they can find stability and fulfillment on their own terms. This isn't just a phase, it's a shift in priorities, a subtle, perhaps even subconscious acknowledgement that they can't keep giving themselves fully when they're not certain of the return. Each new activity, each personal goal they set, is a quiet way of reclaiming parts of themselves that may have felt neglected. They're creating a space for themselves, a sanctuary where they can feel whole, independent of the relationship. This newfound focus on independence isn't necessarily a rejection. It's an act of self-preservation. They're building the strength they need to stand alone, just in case that day comes. But this independence can also be a final warning, a signal that something vital is slipping away. They're no longer looking to you for fulfillment, no longer depending on the relationship for their sense of purpose. It's a way of saying, without words, that if things don't change, they're ready to step into a life where they rely on no one but themselves. In these small acts of independence lies a choice, one that reflects their growing need for balance, self-respect, and freedom. And with each step towards self-reliance, they're sending a message. They're preparing for a future that may no longer include you. Boundary 4. No longer fighting for the future. There was a time when they would talk about the future with you, shared dreams, plans for tomorrow, visions of what could be. They spoke about the trips you'd take, the life you'd build together, the milestones you'd hit. It was a future filled with hope, where every plan felt like it had a place in the story of your lives. But now, when you bring up those same dreams, they respond with silence or a simple, almost indifferent nod. Their once excited words are now absent, replaced by a resignation that lingers in the air. What was once a vibrant conversation about possibilities has turned into an empty exchange. The plans they once spoke about with joy now feel like hollow words, nothing more than fleeting ideas that don't seem to hold any weight anymore. They no longer fight to keep those dreams alive, no longer try to reassure you that the future is still something to work toward. It's as if they've accepted that those dreams are no longer theirs to pursue, that the future you once envisioned together has already slipped through their fingers. This shift represents a quiet resignation, a recognition that the relationship may not be what they thought it could be. They've come to terms with the fact that the future they once imagined may never come to pass. It's the final stage of letting go, emotionally detaching from something that no longer feels within reach. And though they may not express it outright, this detachment is palpable, present in every conversation about tomorrow, every missed opportunity to plan and dream together. From a Stoic perspective, this shift can be seen as an acceptance of what is beyond one's control. The Stoics taught that we must focus on what we can change and let go of what we cannot. When someone stops fighting for a future, it's because they've accepted that it's beyond their power to change things. They've come to terms with the reality that no matter how hard they wish, hope, or dream, the future they once saw with you may never be realized. This acceptance is a boundary, one that's hard to come back from. Once they stop fighting for the future, once they let go of the dream, it's almost impossible to undo. That emotional detachment, once in place, becomes a silent but unbreakable line they've drawn. And with it, the future that could have been slips further and further away. As we reflect on the boundaries we've explored, It's important to remember that these aren't the loud, obvious signs of someone walking away. These boundaries are quiet. They're internal shifts that, if left unnoticed, will slowly build a wall between two people. Each boundary represents a subtle change, a change that speaks volumes without saying a word. First, there's emotional withdrawal, the slow retreat from sharing and connecting, a sign that the person is protecting themselves. Then, the loss of patience, a build-up of frustration that no longer finds a place for forgiveness, signaling a loss of energy to keep going. Next, prioritizing independence, a quiet reclaiming of one's own identity, a person beginning to stand on their own, perhaps preparing for a future that doesn't include you. And finally, no longer fighting for the future, a shift from hopeful dreams to silence, where the vision of tomorrow becomes just that, a vision no longer worth the fight. Each of these boundaries is a step, a subtle shift that, when crossed, indicates someone is preparing to walk away. They're not dramatic moments, but rather quiet realizations that grow over time, like cracks in a foundation that go unnoticed until the whole structure begins to crumble. They are often the final warning, the signs that someone has started to emotionally detach, and that unless something changes, they will move on. From a Stoic perspective, we are reminded that relationships, like everything else in life, require mutual respect, effort, and understanding. The Stoics believed that we must control what we can and accept what we cannot. When these boundaries are set, they are a wake-up call to the other person, a signal that things have shifted, and if nothing is done, the relationship may not survive. It's an opportunity to reflect on what's gone wrong and to make the effort to rebuild before it's too late. Relationships require both people to be fully engaged, to listen, to communicate, and to respect each other's needs and boundaries. When these quiet boundaries begin to form, it's a time to take a step back and recognize the signs. If you see someone pulling away, losing patience, prioritizing their own independence, or no longer fighting for a future with you, don't ignore it. These are the moments to have the hard conversations, to ask the questions that may feel uncomfortable, but that could save the relationship from slowly fading into nothing. If you're in a relationship where you see these boundaries being crossed, it's time to listen, reflect, and communicate. Respect these shifts and make sure to engage before you find yourself facing the painful reality of emotional distance, a reality that could have been prevented if only those boundaries were addressed in time. Don't wait until it's too late. Recognize the signs and act before the quiet withdrawal turns into a permanent goodbye.